serious, what was the scariest, most life-threatening situation you have ever been in? What happened and why? I was walking on the side of a poorly lit country road in the middle of the night and was too tired to hear a car coming. Someone hit me at about 60 miles per hour, I'm guessing. Knocked me out of my shoes. The driver didn't stop. I was fading in and out of consciousness in the road and couldn't move my legs. I used what energy I had left to drag myself off the road and call for help in the loudest voice I could. Luckily someone heard me. Ambulance came. Broken tibia, scapula. 0/10 would not do again. Delivering a pizza to the hood one winter night, listening to the police scanner as I tend to do in the city. I pull into the driveway, 250 Ravine Street, and I'm sitting in the car collecting the receipt and stuff for my delivery when boom 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 boom, look to my left, and in the driveway next door, the guy was shooting into the freaking house. Meanwhile I'm sitting in the next driveway watching this guy, with a freaking light up car topper on. We have multiple calls now, and shot spotter picking up 6 shots. 252 Ravine. The guy walked down the driveway, stops, looks at me staring at him from my car, then just walks down the street away from me. The cops didn't even come. So I realize my night isn't nearly as intense as some of the others, but I was hiking alone one evening. Fast forward. The sun went down, so I was stuck hiking 2 miles alone at night in the woods, and I hear the cry of a mountain lion somewhere behind me. If you have never heard one, go look up what they sound like. F-king terrifying in the dark. I end up walking the majority of the way back to my car backwards. The only thing I'd ever been told is not to turn your back to a mountain lion, because they naturally ambush surprise attack. Made it out safe, so it must have worked. Never been so scared in my life. TL. Doctor hiking in the woods in complete darkness and heard a mountain lion behind me. When I was a freshman in high school, our family was coming home from a wake for my brother's mother-in-law. We were driving down a dark road when suddenly my dad has to slam on the brakes. The car in front of us got hit head-on by a Ford Pinto wagon model. The Pinto got spun around and ran into a ditch. When the Pinto was spinning, we saw a man get thrown out the back window and a woman fall out the passenger door. We stopped to help, along with a few other cars. When we got to the Pinto, the driver was dead. The man and woman who fell out were dead, but we also noticed diapers all over the ground, which made everyone start looking for a baby. I found the baby alive, about 20 feet away from the man. We think he was probably holding the baby in the back part of the Pinto when the crash happened. The guy in the car in front of us was fine, just a bump on his head and in shock. My uncle was mentally disabled and lived in assisted living for as long as I could remember. My mom was very protective of him, and as kids we would go visit him once a week to check on him, spend time with him, and make sure he wasn't being abused. My mom spent a lot of time looking for good places to put him, and was finally able to move him to a nice, new facility on the south side of our city. I was used to being around mentally handicapped people because of our visits, and really enjoyed spending time around them. Although sometimes it could be scary for a little person, for the most part it was fun to talk to them, and I always got lots of hugs. One day we went to see him, and found out that they were planning to move him to the facility next door that wasn't as nice. They asked us to take a tour with a nurse, while she tried to convince my mom it would be for the best. I remember walking into a long dark hallway with doors on either side that led to patient rooms. We kept walking until we got to a big open room with lots of tables that functioned as a cafeteria and a communal meeting space. Although there were windows lining the back of the room, it was still very dark and eerily quiet inside the facility. My sister and I were playing around the tables while my mom talked to the nurse, and I noticed a man approaching me. He was walking toward me with a sort of half smile on his face, and since this was a pretty normal occurrence I smiled back and assumed he wanted a hug. As he got closer his eyes got kind of crazy, and he raised his hands and put them around my neck and started choking me as hard as he could. In that instant I couldn't breathe, I couldn't talk, and no one was looking at me. Luckily I was standing close enough to one of the tables that I was able to gently wrap my fingers on the tabletop, which got the attention of my sister. I remember watching her look stunned, and then she ran over to try to get my mom's attention, who at first assumed my sister just wanted to bother her with something trivial. When my mom and the nurse saw what was going on, they ran over and pried the man off of me, but it took some force because he didn't want to let go. It only lasted a few seconds, and I imagine this will be pretty vanilla compared to a lot of the other stories, but this one event was the most terrifying thing I've experienced. To be so completely helpless that you can't run away or yell for help or even fight back was such a horrible feeling. I also think often about what would have happened had he been able to make me pass out before I was able to get anyone's attention. I've posted this in another thread, but I feel it is appropriate here too. This was about 10 years ago. I was 12 at the time. I was really sick. So sick to the point that I was in the doctor's office at least once a week because they couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. It was summer and I wasn't in school. I was hungry, so I asked my grandma to run out to get me some takeout. She left me sitting in the recliner chair watching SpongeBob huddled under a blanket. I got tired, so I decided to close my eyes to get a quick nap in before she got home. I could hear SpongeBob playing in the background, so I knew I wasn't all the way asleep. Then my grandma gets back and starts making small talk with me. "Sweetie, how are you? Have a good nap," etc. Then like she teleported from across the room to next to me in the chair I was being shaken awake. Chicken 15. Wake up. What's wrong? I woke up, eyes groggy and sleepy, and looked at my grandma and said, "I thought you were way over there," pointing to front door across the room. My grandma freaked out and called my doctor again. He was worried and decided to schedule me a CT scan for the next day. We got the results back a few hours later, and they weren't good. I had a large brain tumor about the size of a peach pressing on my cerebellum. I was in for surgery within the next 3 days. We found out later that me falling asleep watching SpongeBob was actually me falling into a coma. My grandma had gotten home just in time to wake me up. Another 2 to 3 minutes and I would have been gone. Was doing 70 miles per hour in the highway when the car in front of me ran over a box of an unassembled dresser. Wood just exploded about 20 feet in front of me, was probably too close to the car in front. I made evasive maneuvers and lost control of my car and did a few spins. All of this happened on an overpass too. When the car stopped spinning, I sat facing incoming traffic in the dead center of the highway and quickly pulled over to the side. I managed to avoid all the wood, all the cars around me, and the edges of the bridge. The spin lasted so long my wife had 3 long screams, catching her breath in between each one. After that, I was pumped up from the adrenaline rush and got a high five from a guy who pulled over. My wife was in hysterical tears. I was robbed at gunpoint twice in the span of 3 weeks. The first time was the scary one. I was at work, the chime sounded meaning the door opened. I was putting something in a drawer and stood up to greet whoever it was and was met with someone in a mask jumping the counter at me. He shoved a gun in my back and told me he would kill me if I didn't give him what he wanted. He had me get on the floor and just repeatedly told me he would kill me if he didn't get the money. I told him I would give him anything he wanted, but I had to get up from the floor. I got up, gave him the money from the register. He took my wallet, and then he told me to get on the floor and count to 10, or he would blow my head off. I heard the door open and shut again. I didn't even count. I was prepared to lay down there all day. I didn't know if he was messing with me and was still in the store just waiting for me to pop my head up so he could kill me. The door opened again, and I thought that he came back to finish me off. Thankfully, it was the old barber from next door. He had heard some scuffle and saw a car speed off from the parking lot and figured I had been robbed. He came to check it out and made sure I was okay. That's what happened. As far as why did it happen, he was a waste of carbon that was trying to get easy money instead of working for a living like everyone else does. He came back and robbed me again 3 weeks later. I quit that job and moved away. I got a call a few months later from the detective that had been assigned to my case. They had caught the guy. However, they weren't going to charge him with the robberies for my store. They said they knew it was him, but he had been wearing a mask, so the charges may not have stuck to him. He was being charged with murder and various other charges. Sometime during the 3-week span of robbing me twice, this guy had tried to scam someone in a drug deal. The other person saw it was a scam and there was a scuffle, and the guy that robbed me killed the other person. I hope that was clear. So, the guy that robbed me was capable of killing someone. That left me with a bizarre feeling. My boyfriend and I were going to go rock climbing with a couple of friends in Brisbane. It was going to be my first time climbing on a natural surface, so the boys let me choose what section of the cliffs we would be climbing. I chose a section with a couple of big ledges. It looked kind of like a giant set of stairs, and our friend and my boyfriend began the long walk to the top to begin the setup. While we were putting on our harnesses and whatnot, then I chickened out because I was too cold and I didn't think my icy hands would hold me. I was actually just terrified of night climbing, but I didn't want to sound like a big baby, so my boyfriend offered to go first and show me the way. The climb up was pretty good. He got to the top but wasn't able to get the last halt, so he yelled out he was going to come back down. He sat back in his harness and then the rope gave way. I watched him fall 18 meters and I ran to him and got there as he hit the ground. He was silent and unmoving, and I screamed at him wordlessly for what seemed like forever, but in reality it was probably just a few seconds. He finally groaned and looked up at me and tried to get up. I begged him to stay on the ground as I held the gash on his head. One of my friends tried to comfort me by telling me that the paramedics were on the way, while the other ex-army medic made sure my boyfriend could still use his legs. When the police got there, they pulled me aside and asked me questions. This was not the first incident. Apparently there has been quite a number of falls at Kangaroo Point in the last year and their suspicions are high. They took our gear for criminal investigation, which is still ongoing. It was November. But the good news is that my boyfriend is going to be fine. He had 2 broken ribs, a collapsed lung, and all the lower vertebrae in his back shattered. He has to wear a full body brace, but he will fully heal. If anyone is interested, I can post a photo of his funny looking brace. TL. Dr. I was going rock climbing, chickened out and asked my boyfriend to go first. Rope gave way. He fell 18 meters and the police suspect criminal intent. Edit. Here is an album for those curious about the brace. http imga.com//kivna. My wife and I were woke about 2 AM several years ago. We heard our dog walking around the house, which he never does. I heard his tail slap the wall several times, which means someone was petting him. He only does that when he sees her or I, or when being petted. My heart was thumping like you wouldn't believe. I reached over, hit the lock for my handgun, told my wife to get out of bed and lay on the floor next to it. I walked down the hall and saw 2 bodies in our office area. I ended up dropping both of them within feet of where they stood. My previous training taught me in a situation like this to shoot first. Both dead, and a total of 4 guns on them. Found out later they were wanted in 2 neighboring states for rape and murder of 3 women. Back in 2007 I happened to be in Pakistan visiting some family. I had been there for 2 weeks and everything seemed fine. One night there is a lot of noise coming from outside. I was confused, no idea what it was, but my cousin told me it was an international cricket tournament that held great value in their tradition. I thought nothing of it and continued the day. The next day everyone was on edge, telling me to stay inside, so naturally I start getting suspicious. I do some research and find Benazir Bhutto, former Prime Minister of Pakistan, had been assassinated and heavy protests were being held. This was the source of the noise. Anyways, back on track. A few days later, men are going around knocking on doors, holding people at gunpoint. My uncle told me to hide in the basement, which is fairly well hidden, and so I did. I heard voices, but I don't speak the native language, so I didn't understand the conversation. They began searching the house, holding my uncle at gunpoint. Luckily they didn't find me, although I still don't know their intentions to this day. My uncle refused to give me explicit detail as he thought he would scare me and that I would never visit them again. About 20 years ago a boiler I was working on exploded. Natural gas explosion. Blew both ends open on a 8-foot diameter Canadian-made Saskatoon package boiler. I was stupid enough to be squatting in front of it like a baseball catcher. 1 second in watching the purge timer count 59. Then the loudest bang I have ever heard, and the light goes out for a few seconds. As I open my eyes, I'm no longer where I was at 59. I was now alongside the thing facing where I had been squatting. As I got up I noticed a few strange things. My face was numb. The boiler was up, there was a cloud of rust settling all over the area, and directly in front of me there was a large dent in the front of the boxy air compressor. My face was numb and my hand registered nothing but blank space when I felt around my forehead, nose, and upper lip. Realizing I was in shock, I quickly stumbled out of the room and was immediately pushed down by the staff as I was obviously bleeding and ripped up. A ride in an ambulance and some stitches and a few x-rays later I was sent home a very lucky man. Was told the only reason I survived with nothing more than a few itchy scars and a permanently compressed first disc and extremely sore neck a lot of the time is that I was squatted down like a baseball catcher, looking straight ahead, spine perfectly straight. Any other position. Probably not the most interesting story in here, but it's on my mind as it only happened a couple of days ago, so I might as well share. I'm on holiday in Borneo with my father and brother, and being rather adventurous we decide to do some caving. We did a couple of easy ones and thought, frick it, we won't be here again, let's do one of the harder ones. All's going well, and a few kilometers in, we reach a bit where you lower yourself a few meters down a steep bit using a rope attached at the top. Our guide, who admittedly didn't have the best English, forgot to mention that you should stick to the left, as the right side rocks are wet and muddy and very slippery. Not knowing this, I put one foot on the right side, and I was gone, swinging out sideways, free falling about a meter before the ropes went taut, and even then the rope just started slipping through my hands. I don't stop until my hands reach a knot in the rope, stopping my fall and properly wrenching my arms. Phew, I'm alright, with just a scratch on my hand from the rocks. I go to put my feet on the floor, but can't find anything. I look down to see nothing below me but this maybe 2-meter wide hole, of which I can't see the bottom. I promptly scream. The guide turns around and says something along the lines of, "Oh, that's a deep hole. Stay away from it. Thanks for that." 2. Doctor almost fell down a deep hole deep in a cave. Things were deep. 2 years ago I was in a serious car wreck. An industrial size sink plumbing van hit me right on my door going about 65 miles per hour. It knocked my car over several lanes and crushed it to the point where the seat that I was in ending up in the middle of the car. It took an hour or so for the fireman I assumed to cut the car up. When I got to the hospital the doctor said with everything considered I shouldn't have really been alive. Doing fine now with no lasting damage, except some scars from where it ripped my eyelid/eyebrow up. I had just moved into my first apartment, across town with my boyfriend and his best friend. We decided to have a housewarming party to celebrate our newfound freedom, which, for a bunch of 20-somethings just consisted of having a bunch of people over and getting shoot-faced. Well, the party was a huge success with tons of people scattered throughout the split-level, loft-style apartment and a pretty big group of us were all on the upstairs patio smoking. A guy nobody recognized started sloppily walking up the stairs to our patio. He starts mumbling something about living next door. I just figured our new neighbor was coming home drunk and that was that. After I was done with my cigarette I went inside with almost everyone else who had been out there, leaving my boyfriend and the neighbor on the patio. A few minutes later I was on the doorstep telling a friend goodbye when I heard my boyfriend. He was talking to someone very aggressively on the patio. He said seems a beach get in the house. Me being drunk and clueless said something to the effect of hold on and started to go about my business when he screamed, "Get in the house, he has a gun." At this point me and my friend took off to the car and waited on the cops to get there. While waiting in the car I heard a gunshot. I will never be more scared than I was right then and there. I ran towards the front of the apartment and met the cops at the same time. My boyfriend was luckily talking to an officer out of sight to my left. The guy and my boyfriend had gotten into a fight with a gun and they arrested the guy. All it did was shatter a window. TLDR, boyfriend got into a fight and nearly got shot. In 2013 my wife and I got married in Kauai. Our family and friends attended. The day we were scheduled to fly home, myself, my brother-in-law and his girlfriend decided to go for one last swim on the beach at the house before we packed up and left. So we went out in the water and got a little too far from shore. Next thing I know, we're being pulled further out to sea. Brother-in-law and I are both scuba divers, so we knew to swim parallel to the shore. Bill's girlfriend is not a diver and not a real strong swimmer. So Bill swims off to the left, but his girlfriend panics and latches onto me since I was closer. She's practically climbing onto my head as I swim, forcing my head under. I knew she was panicking, but I'm not a rescue swimmer, so I just did what I could to maintain composure. I looked back towards shore and there is my new bride, her parents, my parents and our friends all watching us drift out to sea. On the last day of our wedding vacation in paradise, I managed to swim enough to get us out of the riptide and back to shallow water, but it was scary as hell, and the vision of everything I loved watching us float away from shore is forever burned into my memory. Was nearly crushed against a warehouse shelving rack by a co-worker driving a cherry picker forklift. Throwing out garbage/cardboard during a slow time of day. It's the thing to do when there's no orders to pick. Had to squeeze between his machine and the rack while holding a sizable amount of junk. Only about an inch or so on either side. Suddenly, and W/O looking, this guy fires up his machine and starts moving towards me. If I hadn't let out that primal howl of terror, it'd be a dead man. A coked out hooded thug waved a gun in my face. He shot someone else non-fatally later that night, but he was holding that thing an inch from my face. I was looking down the barrel. That was pretty bad. I was at the Calgary Stampede, which for those of you who don't know what it is, it's basically a week of rides and Western style events. I was getting strapped into the Mach 3, which was one of those huge rides that has 2 seats on each end, and it spins you from the ground to like 200 feet in the air and back down again in a circle. So as I was being seated, they put the seat protector down, and I pushed against it to make sure it was securely locked into place. But when I pushed against it, it went right back up. Right when I was about to yell out to the ride operator, he sent us up. So now we were sitting 200 feet in the air, waiting as the other end of the ride was getting people loaded on. I was 100% convinced I was going to die. At any moment the ride was going to move, and I was going to be catapulted into the pavement below. It was horrible. I remember wrapping my arms around the seat brace and squeezing it as tight as I could against my chest, hoping in some crazy miracle I could hold it tight enough to keep me in the seat. Eventually the ride moved, and I prepared to die. Somehow though, that seat brace locked itself in, because it sure as shoot stayed in place and I did not die. Obviously, I was way too scared though to even realize the ride was going, and I was supposed to be having fun. Worst and scariest experience of my life. Not the most dangerous situation I've been in, but it was the scariest in the moment. I was traveling and staying in women's dorm in a hostel. I came back late one night and was lying down to go to sleep around 3 AM. Shortly after I'd settled in to go to sleep, I hear someone open the door. It's very dark, but somehow I could make out that it was a man. I just froze. He stood there silently for several minutes, watching to see if anyone was awake. It was the weirdest feeling, because my mind was telling me, dude, WTF are you doing? You need to sit up and yell, but some part of my lizard brain had decided that nope, that wasn't going to happen. No matter how much my conscious mind wanted it to, it was like a switch had been flicked, and one part of my brain had decided to keep me paralyzed for my own safety. I stayed like that for several minutes, while he stood in the doorway. Finally, he takes one step forward. At that instant, it was like the switch in my brain flicked back on, and I yelled in my loudest voice, "What the fuck are you doing?" He stammered some non sequitur about needing to get a taxi, then ran off. Terrifying as it was interesting to have that experience and see how weirdly our brains can work at times.